Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And today we're talking about ethics, medieval ethics. But before we begin, of course, I have to plug the Twitter. Follow us on Twitter if you want to tell us what we got wrong or win a t-shirt, because anybody who tweets us the most interesting thing out of anybody wins a free t-shirt. Nobody's tweeted at us. The Twitter is capital U, lowercase LMTD, capital O, lowercase PINIONS.
Did you know that Trump has announced he's going to form his own social media company or join some sort of social media company in about three months' time?
Really?
Yeah.
I did not hear that.
Yeah, it's announced by somebody affiliated with him today.
That'd be very interesting to see.
Yes.
All right, should we start with Augustine on how to be happy?
Yes, and this was my favorite chapter so far.
Yeah, I really enjoyed
by
this. This
far. Yeah, that was very good.
Yes, so first, Augustine states that everyone wants to be happy. He says that's basically, what we all strive to do, no matter, how we find that happiness. What we want is to be happy. That is common between every possible human being.
And that is wrong.
Really?
Yeah, I have written on the margin, nope, with a little arrow to it. Some people want to be miserable.
You think so?
Yeah. And some people, but then again, you'd argue, well, maybe that makes them happy. But, some people want to suffer. Some people are just miserable, disgusting creatures.
Who?
You haven't been out in the world far enough. There's a lot of people that are just miserable people. They take joy in other people's pain and suffering. They call them the Karens. They want to control other people. They want to, denigrate other people. The great pandemic of 2020
yes,
brought them out in spades.
Mm-hmm. But aren't they finding their own happiness and making other people miserable?
That's the argument, but I think they're just miserable people. And I think some people just don't want to be happy.
Fair enough, I guess.
I don't think there's any proof. This is just their assumption. Mm-hmm. This is the assumption of Augustine. I think isn't it an Aristotelian theory. Yes. that is the basis for the moral code or ethical code, that everybody wants to be happy, however they define it. I just fundamentally disagree with it.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Back then they didn't listen to women.
Yeah.
So maybe that.
Well. For a second, I thought that was going to be pro women, and then I thought about it. It's the exact opposite. Exact opposite of what I thought was being said there.
All right, moving right along.
All right, it's Augustine with this belief, derived from Aristotle, that everyone wants to be happy. He says happiness is only truly possible in the vision of God in afterlife. So that's how we actually get to true happiness. It doesn't matter what we do here on earth. As long as we're striving to see God fully in the afterlife, that's how we get to true happiness. Do you agree with that?
I guess in a sense, he's kind of qualifying it to say that, your happiness or your mood or your satisfaction on earth isn't really the goal. It's to be the ultimate happiness in the hereafter. I agree with that more.
Aquinas, not Aquinas, sorry. Augustine kind of says that, this quote here, he says it's absolutely miserable. He says, the supreme good of the city of God is eternal and perfect peace, not in our mortal transit from birth to death, but in our immortal freedom from all adversity. This is the happiest life. Who can deny it? And in comparison with it, our life on earth, however blessed with external prosperity or goods of soul and body, is utterly miserable. Nonetheless, whoever accepts it and makes use of it as a means to that other life that he longs for and hopes for, may not unreasonably be called happy even now, happy in hope rather than in reality. So he's basically saying, we should use our own lives right now to get to that stage of eternal happiness in the second life. What's happening right now, what the happiness we feel, doesn't matter unless it is happiness in the hope of the next life.
I understand that argument.
Yes. Any other thoughts on it?
Not really. I think they're grasping at a universal as a justification. I just don't. I don't think that necessarily follows the way it's articulated.
Yes.
Yes.
And so then he also says that there's kind of an issue because a lot of people believe that if you're a sinner, everything you do is full of sin and that sort of thing. And Augustine admits that we are all sinners. We are human. We all have to be sinners. But not every personality trait is a vice. Not everything we do goes against God if we are all sinners. There are still some things that bad people, sinners, can do that are good things. Just because we are sinners does not mean that every action, every character trait of us is a sin.
Right. Even Hitler might have loved his dog.
Yes, yeah, I think you've said that before on the podcast,
Yes.
actually. Yeah.
You know, I'm fairly repetitive.
It's good.
There are some certain truths in this world, and I think one of them is good people do bad things, and bad people do good things.
Yes.
Not bad people do only good things. I'm saying, you know, they do mostly bad things, but they do also some good things.
Yeah, and so he also kind of says that pagans can perform good deeds occasionally, but only with faith can you achieve eternal happiness. So, you know, he does admit that, you know, there's a lot of very, I guess, you know, us versus them attitude at this time that, you know, the pagans, they can do nothing right. Nothing good ever comes of not having God in your life. He says, well, no, bad people can still do good things, but they are not going to get that eternal life in the end.
Yeah, it makes a certain logical sense if they aren't aspiring to, you know, fulfill God's will under His theory, then they aren't going to get the eternal life. I don't know what happens with them. Maybe what's His theory? They just go poof.
I don't know. I guess hell, probably.
Really? Would they go to hell? They're good pagans?
I don't know.
It's unanswered in this chapter.
Yes.
I do not know because I have not studied him.
So moving on to Augustine on lying, murder, and sex. This was an
And
interesting...
more sex.
What?
And more sex. Lots of sex.
All right.
Well, there's a lot of discussions about sex and sexual ethics.
Yes, that is a fact. And so he basically starts off listing these 3 commandments that are very, very important. You know, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor, and thou shalt not commit adultery. And so starting off, he states that thou shalt not kill does not apply to plants or animals. So, you know, there's no need to worry about, you know, actually murder if you're killing for food, that sort of thing. He also says that a judge who inflicts the death penalty has not sinned so long as it is according to the law. And I thought that was interesting.
Unless he really enjoyed it.
Yes, that is another thing he brings up later. You know, as long as it's according to the law, purely because, you know, the criminal deserved it, that is the correct sentence for him, then he has not sinned, he has not, you know, murdered, he has just enacted the correct punishment. But if he's enacting that punishment purely because he hates humans, or he hates that person and wants to see them dead, then it is murder.
Yes, it's a little, I think he overgeneralizes it. I think for the ethics of the death penalty, of course, I've contemplated this a lot. I think it just because you have the lawful authority to do it and you don't have a bad intent doesn't make it good or okay. But there has to be you have to contemplate on it. You're making a moral decision. You know, of course, under our legal system, the judge always has the option of not imposing the death penalty. I assume back then they had certain things you just get the death penalty for. Yeah. Like early American history, you know, if you're a horse thief, you pretty much got it. If you killed somebody, you pretty much got the death penalty. Now, I mean, I can speak as to Missouri law that it's never required. So I think there's a little bit more nuance there or whatever. Yeah. But
and kind of similar with the death penalty, he talks about war. And he states that war can be waged with God's authority. And he says that, you know, just wars are waged in self-defense or to rectify serious injustice, and the goal always has to be peace. So war waged with God's authority has to have the goal of peace in mind. It cannot just be, you know, to fight to claim certain things. It has to be to end fighting overall and achieve peace. And he also says that, I like this quote, and he says, remove justice and what are kingdoms but criminal gangs writ large.
That's the truth.
I really liked that quote.
Yeah. We should put that on a t-shirt.
Maybe
That's
we can.
a lot of words, though.
That is a lot of words. So he's basically saying that, you know, even though kingdoms do have that right, that power to wage war, if they don't have justice, then they are criminals themselves, and they are breaking that commandment. It has to be a just war.
Yeah, I think that same theory applies to the death penalty in individual cases. Yes. Kind of like what I was just saying, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. And then he also talks about suicide, saying that suicide is unlawful, and that the commandment thou shalt not kill also applies to yourself. And he states that there is never any good reason to commit suicide.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting discussion about all the different permutations of why you'd feel justified in killing yourself.
Because he brings up, you know, historic examples, you know, just regular dishonor, like in Roman times, or, you know, the temptation to sin, or rape is one of the other things he mentioned. That, you know, even in that, you know, horrible circumstance, you know, it's still not good to kill. You're still ending your own life, and that is against the commandments.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much an absolutist. I assume he would not have any exceptions for really bad depression. You know, I mean, it seems like you're just never going to do it. And it doesn't matter if 100 guys are going to gang rape you and all that and torture you. You know, you can't kill yourself. You have to let them do it, I guess.
Yeah.
Seems a little, black and white.
Yeah.
Well, but I guess that's what he's about.
Yeah.
So at least it's consistent, I guess.
Yeah, there's that.
Although it doesn't make sense that he would say the death penalty is okay and just war is okay when the commandment is thou shalt not kill, period.
Yeah.
But, you know, but he doesn't make exceptions for suicide,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which I would think the harm that you're doing, or I guess he doesn't think that the harm is any worse or any better if you're killing yourself or killing somebody else. It's still killing one of God's creations.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting way to look at it. I don't agree with it, but
Then he also talks about slavery a little bit, and he says that, you know, slavery is the result of sin, but he does not condemn it outright. He kind of basically says it's almost like a thing we kind of just have to live with. It's, you know, not good in a sense, but he does, you know, point to, you know, Paul's commandment in his letters, you know, slaves, obey your masters, and that sort of thing. So he's like, well, slavery's not too good, but nothing I can say about it.
well, I don't know that he says that cavalier,
not that
but
exact,
you know,
yeah.
like back then, you know, slavery was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it was the norm through all cultures and through all areas of the world. And you know, they specifically mention penal slavery, so that's similar to you know, you commit a crime, you end up having to be the guy's slave or somebody's slave, or you're into slavery, you're into bondage. And that's similar to, I mean, in a concept to, you know, the prisoners who are doing a 5-year stretch at a prison having to do the work program where they do various light manufacturing jobs or whatever the case may be. And that's a form of slavery. Penal slavery is part of your punishment. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense in the context of his day that he doesn't have a hard, fast rule against all types of slavery because it was so much part of their society, especially the criminal side of it. Yeah. Because, you know, the U.S. Constitution has a prohibition against slavery, but, you know, you could still make people work when they're in prison.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yes.
moving right along.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Moving on. He talks about marriage. He says that sex is only permissible in marriage. Procreation always has to be the goal. And he sets like limits on what a husband and wife can actually do with each other and that sort of thing. So it's very cut and dry. You know, the goal is always to have children. You know, it's not for the, you know, material pleasure of it. It's for life purely.
Yeah, it's a very old school.
Yeah, well, it's just the 400s.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, some pretty interesting quotes about shameful acts against nature like those of the Sodomites, who are to be detested and punished in every place and every time. And then he, they mentioned that the emperor Theodosius decreed the public burning of male prostitutes. My goodness, yeah. It's a hard time to be a homosexual male prostitute. Although, has there ever been a good time? I don't know.
That's a good question.
Because sometimes they're better than others.
Yeah.
Certainly, the homosexual male prostitutes were not fans of Emperor Theodosius.
Probably not. If I had to take a wild guess, I would say that they did not like him.
But Augustine would say they could not kill themselves to avoid the public burning.
That is a fact.
Pulling it back around.
Yes. Then he also moves on to talk about, you know, almost women's rights in a way. He says that, you know, the wives must obey their husbands, but he does still like list some distinct rights that women have. And specifically, he mentions that men can commit adultery. And this was kind of a big thing. You know, in the instance of adultery, women were often blamed, you know, saying, well, you just didn't provide for your man enough. It's your fault that he went out and had and committed adultery. And Augustine's like, well, no, right. It's the man's fault. He should take the full blame for that. That is what he did. That was his choice. And then he also says that women should have certain property rights. He pointed out that it was terrible that women did not have the right to inherit property, even if they were an only daughter of their father. You know, there should be things that women are still equal to men in some circumstances here, which is very progressive for the 400s.
That's right. That's right. And he went on to discuss like the justifications for lying, if there's a good cause for that, and kind of analyze that a little bit, and that not all lies are equally wrong, and so he had kind of an interesting perspective from back then. But yeah, back then there's certainly nobody pushing for women's equality.
Yeah,
around those times. So to say that, well, if all the sons are dead, or he didn't have any sons, then we should at least allow the oldest woman to inherit the estate. It was the forefront of women's rights movements there. So that's kind of funny.
Move on to Abelard.
Yes,
his ethic of intention. And he says that, what is wrong is not the action itself, but the state of mind in which it was done. So he's talking about
motive. Right.
Yes, all about motive. Doesn't matter the action really in of itself. He says that a bad intention may ruin a good act, and a good intention may justify a prohibited action. So there's kind of a back and forth here. Like, for example, if you give money to a poor person purely to, expect something in return, to expect honor, do it for, basically for show, then that's still a bad action. Even though you gave your money away, your motive was terrible, and you are still committing a sin there. And he also says, good intentions can justify bad actions. He points to self-defense, for example. If you kill somebody who's trying to attack you, your intention was to just protect yourself. It wasn't to go out and kill somebody. So your action there wasn't even a sin.
Right.
I think this is very important to note.
Well, and like the legal terms, the mens rea, which is your intent or your motive, is still very important in our criminal justice system. But we have expanded. So like there's two types of crimes, and which our criminal justice system is essentially our public morality rule book.
Yeah.
And if people miss that. And so you have malum prohibitum and malum in se. So malum prohibitum it's wrong because we say it's wrong, it's prohibited, and malum in se is that it's evil in its own right. And so back in their day, they had generally malum in se. Even malum and prohibitum were stuff that's straight out of the Bible, which is basically an ethic code too. But now we have so many regulations.
So it's like those things would be like speed limits.
Correct.
It's not inherently wrong to go this certain speed here.
It's just the regulation.
It is the regulation.
And then so like a prosecutor doesn't have to prove that you knew that you were speeding. It's just you were going above the posted speed limit, and you're deemed constructive knowledge because the sign was there.
Yes.
Even if you didn't see it. And so, but we see that ever expanding thing, especially the federal government is getting really scary with all the rules and regulations and criminalizing everything. But that's a whole different podcast, probably.
Yeah, probably.
But Abelard's talking about the motive and the intent, and that's what makes something a crime or something wrong or a sin is what you're intending to do as opposed to necessarily what you are doing.
Yeah.
Right.
So then Abelard goes on to state that good intentions not carried out can be as praiseworthy as good actions, and bad intentions are as blameworthy as bad actions. So for this, he kind of uses the example of, if a man goes out with the plan to build an almshouse, to build something to care for the poor in the area, but he's robbed blind, loses all of his money before he does that, he should still be praised for wanting to do that in the first place. He should be praised, he says, like, as equally as the man who actually had the money to go out and do that. And he says kind of like an interesting argument for this, basically saying that, if we're putting so much value on purely the action and not the intention, then we're basically saying that, the rich or the prosperous are inherently more virtuous than the poor because they physically can do more.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's worse to steal from someone who is going to do good with it or someone who is going to just spend it on themselves.
I guess the logic that Abelard would follow is that it is much worse to steal from the person who's going to do good.
I don't think so.
Really?
Because it's your motive.
Oh, I guess
you don't, unless you're purposely stealing so that they can't build the children's hospital, as opposed to you're just stealing it. They just happen to, they're just going to be using it for the children's hospital, unknown to you.
Yes. But if your motive, I think, does he talk about, is this the one that talks about kind of like a Robin Hood thing, or is that Aquinas?
I think that was Aquinas.
Never mind then.
You like your motive to steal justifies or doesn't justify. You can't justify it just because you have a good motive.
Yeah.
I think that was more of a Aquinas discussion. Moving right along to Aquinas, right?
Yes, Aquinas' ethical system. He says that there are two parts of human action according to Aristotle. So he kind of bases his things off of Aristotle here. He says that Aristotle says that there's voluntariness, which is originated by an agent force from compulsion or error. And then there's purpose, which is chosen as a part of an overall plan of life. And Aquinas really tries to expand this a little bit. He says there's three types of actions. There are ends in themselves, means to ends, and then accompaniments to the first two actions. So in that middle, the means to the ends, that is where we see intention. And then the third are just voluntary. So there's things that we still choose to do, but they're not, set out, plans for us to do like our intentions.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It's kind of stuff you do. You're not really thinking about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then he also says that there are three standards for morally good actions. This is kind of the framework for his whole discussion. He says that first, they must belong to classes of acts that aren't bad. So basically things that are listed, basically like in the Bible, that aren't just bad actions. Second, they must take place in appropriate circumstances. And third, they must be done with virtuous intention. And if any of these are missing, it is a bad action. And then he also says that we may not do evil that good may come, because that, violates the first part. We cannot just do actions that are specifically listed as bad actions.
Yes.
Yes. So I figured that was coming. And so with that, he talks about erroneous conscience, in that, we're kind of bound to do what our conscience tells us to do, but it does not excuse us. If we have a bad conscience, that is our own fault. We cannot blame our own bad actions on our own bad part of us. Because, that is something that we formed ourselves, formed in error to compel us to do more things in error in the future.
Right.
Yes. Moving right along. He says that goodwill cannot be fully genuine unless it is put into action when the opportunity arises. So this is kind of similar to what Abelard was saying about, if you have the good intention to do something with your money, but then you're robbed, you still are as praiseworthy. And Aquinas says, well, even though you do have that will, it's not fully completed until that action is completed. But there is still some praise to be had for the people who plan to do good things and then just simply cannot.
Right.
All right. Moving along.
You're explaining it very well.
Yes.
I don't have to elaborate on everything.
Oh, yeah. He says that use of violence in self-defense is permitted so long as death is an unintended consequence. And I think this is a really big thing that I kind of liked. Is that you should not, if you're acting in self-defense, you should not be actively trying to kill the person. But if the person ends up dying, that's not a sin, because your first goal should always been to defend yourself, to defend your own life, and not to take another's life.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, except for in a lethal force situation. So if somebody's coming at you with a knife, and you have a firearm, and you're pointing it at them, and you're telling them to stop, you're giving every opportunity for them to not attack you more, you have to choose to use lethal force to stop them. You're not going to do as Joe Biden suggested, try to shoot them in the leg. You have to incapacitate them, and you have to attempt to use lethal force. But I think I agree with
Aquinas would agree with you there.
Yeah, I think that's what I was about to say. I think he's but you're still not in favor of killing them. You're not like, oh, I want to kill this son of a bitch.
I mean, but like you were saying, you've already held the gun up, you've tried to tell them to stop, and they will not stop, and your only option is to shoot.
Right.
So your intention is still to primarily protect your life, not to go out and kill somebody just for the heck of it.
Right. I think I think that's where some people get a little sideways with their self-defense claims, where they're like, get off my property, bam, It's like, give it a chance, man, give it a chance to turn around and go back or something.
Yes. And so then Aquinas kind of moves on. He says that Kenny kind of says that Aquinas' ethical theory really isn't primarily based on biblical law, but he instead draws more from Aristotelian virtue. And I thought this was kind of interesting, because at this time, it's very much because the Bible says, but Aquinas really kind of looked at things as, what is right? How can we look back into our past and look at these other people? How did they determine what is right? How can we use their teachings to determine what is right now?
Right.
I think that's a very good thing to look at.
Yeah, and then Aquinas kind of elaborates on Aristotle to say, that's all well and good, but it's not just about a system of ethics. You have to have the grace of God, and be seeking the divine truth in order to really do good and to be a moral person, right?
That's kind of what he talks about, kind of differentiates us from animals. He says that all creatures exist to serve God. They're all there, for God, but intelligent creatures find fulfillment in understanding and contemplation of God, and that humans do not have a natural capacity for supreme happiness, so they use their free will to turn to God. So it's kind of like an argument that, we're not entirely reliant on God to do all of our, moral actions, but because we still have that free will to turn to him, we still have that choice to turn to this source of morality, and that is where we still have the option to choose in our lives.
Right, and I think his bottom line, as Mr. Kenny says, human beings can be perfectly happy only if they can share the superhuman activities of the divine.
Yes.
So that like we can do good things, we can be ethical to a certain level, but we can only be truly happy if we have the divine part of us in there.
Exactly.
The grace.
Mm-hmm.
The
says
grace
that
God.
laws are derived from reason, but then the whole world is governed by the reason of God. So in the end, what laws we make, what laws we determine, through thinking things through, eventually we make our way back to God.
That's a good idea.
Yes.
But I don't think that the current Congress of the United States is lined up with the goals of the Almighty.
I would agree with you there. Moving on to Aquinas as moralist. And so here he kind of addresses very individual topics.
On that last subject, especially since our representatives want to increase all the funding for the killing of babies.
Yes.
So I just want to throw that out there for our pro-choice listener.
Yes. I think he was long gone by the Macedonian pro-choice and a Greek person walking into a bar joke, which was never fully completed, I don't think.
Well, it's not a joke. It's just sad.
Yeah, I think that's what it ended up being. It was just kind of miserable.
I couldn't come up with a good punchline.
That was upsetting.
Yeah.
So Aquinas as moralist. So first he talks about just war, and he says that it has to be waged by officials, not citizens. There has to be a just cause. For example, the enemy must be guilty of fault, and the intention must always be to promote good or avoid evil. So this is very similar to what Augustine was saying, but he also kind of throws in there that, just citizens can't wage war. It has to be somebody with the power to do so, because if a citizen is waging war, that's really just a criminal gang.
Yeah, I don't know if I buy that.
Yeah, I don't think I do
because
either.
Because sometimes, sometimes there's a necessity of vigilantism.
Yeah.
But
at this time, kings and officials were thought to really have their authority given to them by God. So that was really the driving force behind that.
Right. And the one argument I did like where he made about the death penalty, which maybe you're going to get to next, was kind of like the same theory of just war. If you could go to war and kill people for a just cause, how's that any different than killing an individual for just cause, the power of the state? So it's kind of an interesting simplification of the death penalty argument. Yeah,
it's differs from Augustine slightly, because Augustine says, well, it's because it's only okay if it follows the law and that sort of thing. But Aquinas really says that it's okay to prevent future evil. That should be the driving force behind capital punishment. It shouldn't just be, well, because the law says we can kill him, so let's kill him. It should be, well, we have seen that killing him will prevent future evil in the future, and that should be what we do.
That was the Catholic Church's teaching for centuries until, 2 years ago?
Very recently.
With Pope Francis, but John Paul II really limited it because of the current criminal justice system can incapacitate people so effectively. It is thought that you really would be limiting future evil acts very much by killing them, killing somebody who's committed murder or whatever the case may be, because you can always intern them. Of course, that doesn't mention the murders of other inmates or guards and all that kind of stuff, and it kind of doesn't really end the moral discussion about the death penalty, the penalty itself. And I think, but anyway, so
but I remember talking to a priest about this for a project. I think like freshman year or something. We interviewed him, had a video of him. I don't know if I want to say his name or not, but
no, don't say his name.
He was the priest at our church for a long time, and I really liked him. And he kind of framed it like he used an example of if you're on a deserted island. And somebody is going around killing people, then it is absolutely within your right, and it's absolutely good for you to apprehend that person and kill him, because you do not have the means to properly restrict him, without the full system. of, imprisonment and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of the framework that the church looks at it now,
Right.
is that we do have the means to imprison them completely and make them do no more harm in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's a good argument.
Yes.
I personally think the lack of the death penalty devalues life.
Yes.
Do you want me to elaborate?
Yes, I would love for you to elaborate.
Because they've already killed somebody.
Yeah.
And when you're in a courtroom, as much as I have been in criminal matters and such, the argument is always made, like whether it's a burglary or it's a robbery or a murder, it's always, well, the crime has already happened. There's nothing we could do about that now. The question is, what do we do about punishing and reforming this individual before you, the defendant? And if we're never going to have the death penalty for the most horrific murders, in some ways, I just think that it devalues the life that was taken. And I know it seems counterintuitive that you would take a life to value a life, but if we don't care, it's kind of like, what if we just make it a misdemeanor?
Mm-hmm.
If we make it a misdemeanor, aren't we just encouraging it? And so as we devalue the penalty, I think we devalue the life that was taken. And I think there are some rare murders. I'm not saying every killer gets the death penalty. Very few, but I think there are some that are just so horrible, like a child rape and like I'm thinking of a specific case. You rape a little girl and you beat her to death as she's calling out for her mother in a pit where it's too tall for her to climb out of. Yeah, I don't think it's bad to kill that person. Of course, that person's still with us. It will probably outlive me because of our sclerotic criminal justice system. If you give somebody the death penalty, they ought to be killed in some sort of expedited, or not expedited, some sort of deliberate speed.
Yes.
And allow them to contemplate their future
Mm-hmm.
off this earth.
Yes. It was actually Aquinas that made this argument. It's not actually stated in this book, but I've
right.
heard him make this argument that the death penalty basically encourages people to repent.
Right.
Because, if you have a deadline, he kind of, I like to use the example of like homework. If I know my homework's due in a month, I'm not going to do it tonight. But if I know if it's due tomorrow, I'm going to do it tonight.
Right.
It's kind of that same argument. Like if you know your end is coming, you're going to want to repent sooner rather than later because you know that it's coming soon. And you have that strict deadline. So you're more likely to repent before your death than if you just die of natural causes. Because
Right.
who knows when that's going to happen.
Yes. So we're just trying to help them out to, redeem themselves. That's my motivation.
Is it? I think that's what I got from that little rant.
I do. Yes.
Yes.
I have to say I don't really concern myself with their. Maybe that's bad. I would not concern myself with the. It's bad. I don't know that I don't concern myself with their ultimate place in the universe after they die.
Well, I think at that point they might have already given up on their ultimate place in the universe after they die.
I wonder.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like they contemplate it. The
Really?
real bad ones.
Yeah.
They seem to just kind of get off on killing people.
Well, that's awful.
But it's out there,
Yeah.
and it happens all the time. I mean, not every day. Well, every day somewhere in the world, and probably in poor places. Could you imagine, like, in countries that don't really have an effective criminal justice system,
Mm-hmm.
those few people that rape and murder, and there are people that are like serial rapists in the United States with all the scientific testing that we could do and crime scene processing. Those countries that don't have that,
Yeah.
can you imagine how much they just run wild in those countries and how much they ran wild, like in the Old West, where you just travel from town to town? Sheesh. I mean, it's just they must have had child serial murders back then like they do now.
Yeah.
But they would have just gotten away with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible.
Right,
Anyway,
so
on that uplifting
on that happy note,
thought.
Aquinas moves on to talk about abortion.
Yeah.
And so he kind of believes that souls develop with the fetus, and so this goes back to his belief that there's a vegetative soul in plants that just allows for growth. There's a thinking soul, not quite thinking but sensing soul that exists in animals, to perceive the environment, and then there's finally the rational soul in humans And he believed that, at certain points throughout the pregnancy, that is when the soul also develops. And then he says that abortion until late pregnancy is wrong only because the fetus is potentially a human, not actually. So he believes that up until a certain point, it's not actually a human, but it's still wrong because you are completely robbing that fetus of its potential to be a human in the end.
Yeah, he's getting there, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, I don't know about, like depends on how you define soul. If his soul is somebody that's able to contemplate, life's great mysteries, then he's right. They aren't, babies. Like you'd say any kid up to age 7 probably can't even figure that stuff out or even think of it. Most of them. So, I mean, you could take that to a pretty upper age. Maybe you don't have a soul if you're a 5-year-old. Do you really have a soul?
I mean, I would say so.
I'd say so. I say it's either there when you're conceived or it's not. But anyway.
Well, this reminded me of another more modern argument that I've seen that, because really the big framework, the big pivot point of the abortion argument is when is a life actually a life, Right. Once that defines the whole thing basically collapses.
Well, you'd think that, but it doesn't. But go ahead.
Yeah. But basically I saw this guy, I can't remember who it was. I saw it somewhere, but like even if we take away the notion of when the life actually begins, like look at it like you have a child in a coma, right? You have this child in a coma, he's costing lots of money, costing lots of stress, mental health issues, just problems abound because you have this child in a coma. But you know for a fact that in 9 months he will wake up and be perfectly healthy. So is it okay for you to pull the plug on that child? Is it okay for you to end that child's life if you know that in 9 months he will be a fully functioning member of society again? And so like that's kind of the absurdity of like the abortion argument, in my opinion, is that even if you deny that it is a life up until birth, like it will be a life at a certain set date. It's not going to be anything else than a human life. And you know that for a fact, and that is going to happen, that baby will be born. And so like, what gives you the right to end that before it is born?
I'll tell you their arguments and their real reason. Their argument is that example is not the same as the reality of an abortion, of a baby or a fetus, I guess I should use their terms. Which is really no different than your appendix or your hair or your teeth. Yes. And so they're saying that what you have as an example is somebody that is already a person who is in a temporary comprised consciousness and who will revert to consciousness and sentient being.
But the issue with that is your appendix will never be a human. Your teeth will never be a human. You know that thing inside of you will be a human no matter what.
Yeah, well, I mean, but, there are a significant number of miscarriages after conception and those arguments. And so I just think that example is not persuasive to those that are the real reason that abortion is sought, and this is controversial, so put on your earmuffs for anybody that believes that abortion is a good thing. It's really just justified, and they will always justify it because it's goddamn inconvenient to have a baby. I mean, the expense. I mean, I got to tell you, you're pretty inconvenient for at least 10 years straight. Mm-hmm. And so, when you think about how much it affects your life when you have a baby coming, and I mean, you're legally obligated to 18 for 18 years. You're legally obligated to support that person, and then beyond that, if they go to college, mm-hmm. I mean, legally with child support and everything, even if you have nothing to do with them, you're going to pay. And and they're just kind of a pain, and they're clingy, and they're how do you, especially for the women, you're pregnant, and it ruins your body for at least a while, and it affects your ability to advance your career or complete your college education or whatever. So it's terribly inconvenient, and that's the vast majority. The vast majority of abortions are because it's inconvenient and costly. That's it, and I think a lot of people have had abortions with the justification it was not human. It was just cells. And once they make that decision and they've had an abortion, they will never, ever contemplate that they were wrong about that.
Well, there are some, but the vast majority.
Ever, except for the very, very few that then become like anti-abortion activists or, or become repentant. But any of those people, and you think of all those people that advocate for abortion, and if you're going to be in college, especially in the later years of college, the people that are really, really advocates for it, do me a favor and do this one very dangerous thing. So if there is somebody in like some crazy blue-haired feminist ranting and raving about how abortion is their right, blah, 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 just ask them one question. How many abortions have you had? And they're not going to want to answer. And they're not going to want to answer because on some level they feel shame. Yeah. And they know it's wrong and selfish. But they're either going to answer, well, it's none of your business. It's my decision, blah, 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 blah. And so you should then immediately mention, well, you know what? You seem to be pretty personally invested in this topic. I don't know that you should really express your opinions because you have a personal vested interest in the outcome of this discussion. Or they will say, I've had 4. And they'll just, without batting an eye, and then they will turn off the entire crowd because even pro-abortion people know that you shouldn't have abortions. But anyway. Yes. Do that favor for me if you ever.
All right.
And then once you ask that question, somebody's going to punch you. Go ahead. Anyway, moving along.
Yeah. So then Aquinas turns to a bit of lighter topics. He says that there is a right to property. It's never okay to steal anything. But he sets some rules on money making. He says that it's sinful to accumulate more property than necessary. Second, that if you have money to spare, you have a duty to give alms. And then third, the poor may take your spare property in urgent need. And so he's basically kind of saying, just don't have too much. If you have an excess, give it to the poor. And if you have an excess and you aren't giving it to anybody, then the poor, if they are in desperate need of that, they can just take it from you.
And, as I get older and as these robber barons of the tech world and other industries get more and more accumulated wealth, I'm coming more and more down on the side of this guy right here saying, you know what? It's not good that you've accumulated $10 billion worth of wealth and you're just sitting on it. Yeah. And I know they're investing in it and all that kind of stuff. It's good for the economy to people accumulate wealth and they invest it, well, whatever. But boy, I'm coming more onto this. I'm getting more and more, I'm going to be pretty soon. I'm going to be standing shoulder to shoulder with the Antifa out there. They're going to burn down Bill Gates' house or something. Because at some point, both ends of the spectrum are going to be shoulder to shoulder against these guys. Mm-hmm. These guys and women, mostly guys. Yeah. And then he had a lot of interesting thoughts about usury. Yes. Because the Muslim faith is prohibits lending, usury at interest rates, and I think they're just stupid because they don't know economics. I mean. Well, what? Well, you roll your eyes because there's a benefit to everybody if you are able to loan money at a reasonable interest rate. So like a 30-year fixed mortgage now is like 3%. I mean that's really not much, and so you're able to borrow that money so that you can get the stuff that you need now in your home, and then you just pay it back with interest, which is just some premium paid to them for the use of their money. I don't see why that's evil.
Yes. I agree with you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, Duns Scotus on divine law. And so he really kind of takes away from Aquinas, Aquinas saying, we should put virtue first. Scotus is very much hard and set on it's just divine law. Just follow the law.
Right.
It's very central to his beliefs. He says that this is actually something I do agree with him, that humans pursue happiness and justice. He defines justice as the tendency to obey moral law, but no matter the consequences for your own welfare. And I do really believe that because, like the examples I was bringing up last episode, I think we do have a drive, beyond our own capacity, for the betterment of society. Like I said, take a bullet for somebody else purely because it is the right thing to do. That is that concept of justice. That is not happiness that you're striving for. There's no ultimate benefit for that, but just because it is the right thing to do.
I think we should qualify that moral people are seeking that, not everybody.
I can agree with you there. Right. Yes. And so then he also says that freedom extends to choice between independent and competing goals. And so he really kind of believes that really the whole framework for our life is set up with really only a few choices that we have to make. What is our end goal? Do we want to be moral or do we want to be immoral? And basically, everything else flows from that. It's very much a very, I guess, generalized view of what we do in our entire lives. We either follow the law or we don't, and that is basically it to Duns Scotus.
Right. Yeah, there's a divine law, and you're either on board or you're not.
Yeah, he says that wrongness and rightness of will's choice is determined by whether or not it corresponds to divine law. So basically, everything is set up. Is it according to the law or is it not? And that's it.
Right.
Which I think is very brutalist and not very... I don't like this very much. I think there's some truth to it, and that if we kind of take from Aquinas' reasoning a little bit, if we believe that laws are derived from reason, therefore the laws we should follow are in of themselves from reason. I do think there is some truth to that, but I don't think we should purely follow laws for the sake of them being laws.
Right. Well, I think I think he doesn't really place an emphasis on your motive or your intent or your that, but there is some utility to say just do what you're told.
Yeah.
If you're doing all the stuff right, then you're doing good.
Yes.
And so, but okay, how do you decide what is the right stuff to do? I think our current society has drifted the other side, which is if your motive was good, then it's all okay, and that's not right either. There has to be some balance between there.
That's why I think Aquinas'
much
set
better.
of 3 is much better.
That's right. Yes. I agree. Yeah.
And
pretty,
so then
pretty bright guy.
Yes, a little bit. He only wrote like millions of words.
Yeah.
And so then he kind of moves on to discuss, what is God free to do with us? He says that God's freedom to command is absolute. So God can really command us to do anything, and it is imperative that we listen because we can do nothing else. We have to follow the laws, and God's word is law. He says that the infinite owes no obligation to the finite. And there is a limitation on human capacity for moral reasoning and externalization of the notion of sin.
Yeah.
So basically, to summarize, we really can't figure everything out by ourselves. We have to rely on God. We have to rely on specifically what he says. He owes nothing to us. We owe everything to him, and so we have to follow his word forever. And basically, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Follow the rules, buddy.
This is probably the easiest part of Duns Scotus to understand.
That's right.
It's
pretty simple.
Yes. So moving on to Ockham.
Yes.
Yeah, so Ockham believes that freedom is the fundamental feature of humanity. Everything derives from our freedom. This was, similar to his nominalism, and that, everything is free to us. And he also says that the will is independent from reason. So, in some choices, we do things purely because we want to do them, not because there's a logical reason for it, but purely because we think it is, or not even that we think, we just want to do it.
Yes.
And that I do agree with.
A lot of truth to that.
I absolutely agree with that. And then he also believes that law, not virtue, is central. So he's similar to Scotus here. In the past, he's very much differed from Scotus on many issues, but Ockham here does agree that law is fundamental rather than virtue.
Yeah, and back then the law was the church. It's like and they didn't have all the laws we have now, so it's easier to understand. Like we say, well, the law is virtual. What do you mean? I can't take a left turn in that lane? Yeah. That's moral. That's a moral? No, it's not. They didn't have all that back then. They just had, you couldn't commit adultery. They probably had anti-sodomy rules. They had all sorts of those kind of rules that we don't have now. But it was more based upon behavior.
Yes.
And the Bible, of course.
So kind of going off of that, he says that moral value of human acts is derived entirely from God's will. So whatever moral value we place to any action has to be derived from God. There's no other place it can come from.
Yeah, what do you think of that? You were supporting that last episode, right?
In a sense, yes. In that there is some sort of fundamental natural law within us from which we kind of form the rest of our reasoning. The natural law isn't a step-by-step explanation for everything that we should and should not do, but I do believe that there is some sort of urge in us to do the moral thing, and I think that urge...
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Because it's kind of like...
For everyone? Or just moral people?
I think, as a child it's there, but I think it can be eradicated pretty quick, or you can learn to ignore it pretty quickly, depending on your environment and the decisions you make in your life.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of similar to like a I can't think of the word for it, but basically the argument for God that states, everything is dependent on something else. And so if we look back, well, where did I come from? And then where did that person come from? We go all the way back, what started the Big Bang? We have to have a beginning for everything.
Right.
And I think if we look at, every moral decision that's been made, is dependent on another moral decision, is dependent on another moral decision. We cannot simply go back all the way to moral decisions because at some point we just don't have reason as human beings. There has to be some sort of starting point that inspired us to do moral things. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. I don't know that I agree with it. I don't think that the ultimate thing that initiated our moral compass or conscience determines whether or not something is moral or ethical.
Really?
I'll go back to my often repeated example. What if the creator was evil?
Yes.
And I still haven't heard anybody say that the creator couldn't be evil.
Yeah. Well, I think
so maybe if we're doing good things, maybe the creator wants us to torture each other to death, but we're refusing to do that. So let's make that assumption. I know that's not true, but let's make that assumption. Well, then we're doing the opposite of God's will. But couldn't the opposite of God's will be the right thing to do? And if so, how do we determine that that's the right thing to do?
I don't know.
We would leave that there, I guess.
Well, I guess that's kind of a similar thing to Abraham and Isaac. God told Abraham to kill his son Isaac, and that was a terrible thing.
I don't believe that story.
Really?
I know it's in the Bible.
Oh yeah, I know, but I'm just using this as an example.
But I don't believe that God said kill your son. And I got to tell you, I'm not a big fan of Abraham for being willing to do it.
Yeah.
It's a different day and age, and they had human sacrifice all over the world. I get it. And I know it's the covenant, and he's willing to kill his son for God. Fuck him, man. Pardon to use the language.
Yes.
But who's going to kill their son? Who's an innocent, I think, wasn't he supposed estimated to be like a 5-year-old or under or something?
Child, yeah.
An innocent, by all accounts, an innocent kid, not like the kid killed somebody and you're like, I got to do something about this bad seed. It wasn't anything like that. It was just, well, God told me I'm going to kill you, so I got this altar. Hey kid, go get me some sticks. I'll tell you why later. Yeah. It's a horrible, horrible story.
But I guess if we're operating under the assumption that God can do anything, I guess we would have to recognize that God could stop it at any time. And he did. He sent the angel.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, the ask was wrong. How do you tell a dude to kill your son?
Yeah.
Even if you know he's there, I'm not going to let you do it, but he doesn't know. It's like a really bad prank. Mm-hmm. It was an impossibility. Let's give it that it's an impossibility that Abraham's going to be able to kill his son.
Yes. Because
God's not going to let it happen. God already knows he's not going to let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I refuse to believe it.
Yes.
Because I refuse to believe that God would say.
I think it was actually Aquinas that said, it's dependent on his intention there. His intention was to test Abraham's faith. His intention was not to have Abraham kill his son.
Right. It's a shitty thing to do.
Yes.
Don't you think?
Yes. I think that's a terrible thing to do.
I can't get, and I've thought about that a lot over the years, and it's always troubled me, and I can't get past it.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to have to talk to a smart priest. Good luck finding one. No, I'm just joking. No, there's a lot of smart priests. I'm sorry. But somebody's going to have to explain the wisdom of that, because I just don't get it on a basic human level.
That one's always
as a father. Whenever you have kids, you'll even understand it less.
Yes.
You'll be like, what the frickety frack? What were either one of them thinking?
Yeah.
What was God thinking? And then what was Abraham thinking? That's why I'll never be a prophet, because God's going to say, Mark, I want you to kill your dog. No! Fuck you! I will fail the test because I'm just not going to do it. I'm not, let alone my son. I'm not even going to say that. I'm not even going to let play act as if God would ask me that, because I just think it's wrong, and I just don't get that. Anyway, I've gone on a rant too long, I guess.
Right.
But
well, I think that's a good place to end the episode.
All right.
Full of expletives, yes.
Those 2. They're well placed. 3?
3.
Damn it.
It's on the floor.
Son of a bitch. Oh, damn.
I'm gonna have to bleep all this out. You know that. Stop. I don't know how I'm gonna bleep this out.
Is this like a G-rated podcast? Do we have to bleep that out?
We'll have to mark if there's explicit content.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Nobody's ever gonna know.
All right.
God said, "Do not delete the curse words."
All right. Well, this has been Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
Right.
I bet you.
Tweeted us to complain about our language.
I bet you that Buzzsprout people. I bet you people will be more offended by my. I know people will be more offended by my discussion of abortion and abortion rights than they would have by all my swearing.
I am inclined to agree.
Inclined?
Yes.
You know it's true. We'd be. You better not let anybody know that you're in this podcast because they're going to cancel me through you.
It's lovely.
Because you sat passively next to me while I defamed all people who have had abortions.
Yes. This has been Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
I guess I won't bleep that out. That'll be too much work. You use so many in a row. There's no way. There's no way I can do that.